I never believed in the stories, the warnings whispered in hushed tones about the ancient creature lurking beneath the earth. But when I found myself trapped miles underground in a forgotten cave system, staring into the abyss, I understood the terror was real. The air was thick with silence, except for the faint drip of water echoing through the endless tunnels. Something moved in the darkness, something enormous. If you're watching this, I want you to tell me where you are right now, what city and country, because the underground is darker and more dangerous than you could ever imagine. And trust me, it's watching.
The decision to explore the caves wasn't something I took lightly. I'm not the reckless type. But after months of grinding away at a dead-end job in New York, drowning in monotony and the slow drain of my own ambition, I jumped at the chance when an old friend connected me with a team of underground explorers. They planned an expedition to a remote region in Romania, near the Carpathian Mountains, to chart a vast cave system locals whispered about in fearful tones, the Maw. No detailed maps existed beyond the first few kilometers. The rest was unknown, veiled in mystery and danger. I arrived in Bucharest under a heavy sky, the city's cold gray architecture mirroring my restless mood. I was exhausted but eager, clutching my pack tightly. The team was tight-knit. Victor, our leader, a grizzled veteran of spelunking and a former military man. Elena, a sharp-eyed geologist whose passion for the unknown was infectious. And Mark, a tech specialist whose gadgets promised to keep us connected and safe underground. Their quiet confidence soothed my nerves, but even they seemed to hold a trace of unease after hearing the locals' warnings. The villagers eyed us suspiciously, their faces carved by hardship and suspicion. "The caves are cursed," one elderly woman murmured, clutching a worn rosary, her eyes wide and wary. "You'll never return if you go too deep." Another man spat on the dirt and shook his head. I smiled, brushing it off as superstition, a defense mechanism for the unknown. But a shadow of doubt flickered somewhere deep inside me. Our journey to the cave entrance was a grueling ride along narrow, rutted mountain roads lined with ancient pines whose silhouettes clawed at the overcast sky. The air was thick and humid, heavy with the scent of wet earth and pine resin. It felt ancient here, like the forest itself was holding its breath. At last we reached the entrance to the Maw. It yawned like a giant, jagged wound in the earth, an uneven, rough hole swallowed by shadows and thick vines. A cold draft rolled out, brushing my face with a chill that seemed unnatural for the early autumn day. There was something about the place, a weight, an oppressive silence that pressed on my chest. I switched on my headlamp, the beam cutting sharply through the blackness. The cave walls glistened with moisture, mineral deposits shimmering faintly like wet glass. The air smelled of damp stone and something else, a faint metallic tang that made my stomach churn. Water dripped rhythmically from the jagged stalactites overhead, each drop echoing like a ticking clock in the silence. As we descended the steep, slippery slope into the cave's mouth, the sun disappeared behind the rock walls and the temperature dropped sharply. My breath fogged in the cold air. Every step I took echoed eerily, as if the cave itself was listening, breathing with us. Hours stretched on as we navigated twisting passages, squeezing through narrow cracks and balancing over underground streams that gleamed black in the light. My muscles ached, and the dampness seeped into my bones. Every sense was heightened, the rough texture of wet stone under my fingertips, the distant splash of water, the faint, almost imperceptible vibrations beneath my feet. The deeper we went, the stranger the cave became. Passages shifted and split unexpectedly, confusing our maps and sense of direction. Victor grew silent and focused, scanning every shadow with a soldier's precision. Occasionally I caught a glimpse of movement just beyond the light, fleeting shapes that disappeared the moment I turned to look. One time, Elena stopped abruptly, pointing to strange carvings etched into the rock, crude symbols that pulsed faintly with an eerie glow under the headlamps. "These aren't natural," she whispered, snapping photos. "They look ancient, like warnings." The atmosphere thickened with tension, an invisible pressure that weighed on us all. The silence was broken only by the occasional low rumble, like the cave itself was settling or warning us. Night fell inside the cavern far sooner than outside. We found a vast alcove to set up a small camp. The air was icy cold, seeping through our jackets and chilling me to the core. Shadows stretched and warped in the flickering light of our lanterns, turning rock formations into monstrous shapes. Sleep was elusive. Strange sounds echoed from the depths, low growls, wet scraping noises, and distant thuds. My heart pounded with each unfamiliar sound, adrenaline sharpening my senses. I kept imagining eyes watching me from the black void beyond the light. Then, without warning, the ground beneath us shuddered violently. A deafening roar shattered the fragile calm. Rocks tumbled from the ceiling, dust filling the air in choking clouds. Panic erupted. Mark screamed. Then he was gone. The sound of his fall echoed into the void, swallowed by the darkness. We shouted his name, voices cracking with fear and desperation, but no answer came. I shined my light frantically into the blackness where he vanished. Nothing, just endless shadows and silence. That's when I understood the truth we'd been blind to. We were not just explorers here. We were hunted prey. Something ancient and monstrous had woken in the depths of the maw. Something hungry and monstrously large. A presence so primal and heavy, it pressed down on my mind, freezing my blood and setting my teeth on edge. The Leviathan, the underground beast the villagers feared and the explorers whispered about in terrified tones. And it was watching, waiting.
The moment Mark vanished beneath the rubble, everything changed. The cave no longer felt like a place to explore. It felt like a trap closing in on us. The cold seeped deeper into my bones, but it wasn't just the temperature. There was a crushing weight, the overwhelming presence of something ancient and hungry that had awakened. Victor's usually unshakable calm cracked just slightly. I caught the flicker of fear in his eyes, the tight set of his jaw. Elena was silent, her usual curiosity replaced by a grim determination. The air between us was thick with unspoken fear, but we all knew one thing. We had to move. Staying put was a death sentence. We packed what we could salvage from our campsite, careful not to disturb the dust or draw attention. My fingers trembled as I stuffed my jacket into my backpack, the metallic smell lingering in my nostrils like a bad omen. Victor took point, his experience guiding us through the twisting labyrinth of tunnels. Every turn seemed to defy logic. The cave was a living maze, reshaping itself in the dark. My headlamp's beam caught jagged stalagmites that resembled twisted claws reaching up to the ceiling, casting monstrous shadows that danced with every flicker of light. The temperature plummeted even further, the air thick with moisture and an unmistakable coppery tang, the scent of blood, or something worse. It clung to my throat, making it hard to breathe. Then, in the damp mud beneath our feet, I noticed something that froze my blood. Huge, clawed footprints sunk deep into the wet earth. They were fresh, the mud still moist and glistening. These prints weren't from any animal I recognized. The size alone was terrifying, at least twice that of a bear's. "Elena," whispered Victor urgently, "what do you think made these?" She crouched, tracing the outline with a gloved finger. "Not an animal known to science," she said quietly. "Maybe something prehistoric, or something mutated by time and darkness." A shudder ran through me. The legends about the Leviathan weren't just stories told to scare children. They described an ancient beast, blind and monstrous, a predator that hunted in total darkness, perfectly adapted to this underground nightmare. Suddenly, a low, guttural growl echoed from somewhere ahead. It was a sound from the depths of the earth, primal, chilling, and undeniably close. My pulse quickened, my throat tightened. "Stay close," Victor hissed, gripping his flashlight like a weapon. "Whatever it is, it's near." We moved cautiously forward, the beam of our lights piercing the oppressive darkness. Every sound was magnified. The drip of water, the scuff of our boots, the rasp of breathing. I kept glancing over my shoulder, certain I could feel the creature's eyes burning into my back. Then came the roar. Deep and thunderous, it rolled through the tunnels like an earthquake. The cave itself seemed to tremble. "Run!" Victor barked. We broke into a desperate sprint. I stumbled over loose rocks and mud, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst through my chest. Behind us, the cavern shook with the monster's pursuit. The roar morphed into snarls and the scrape of claws on stone. I caught a glimpse of it, a massive, hulking shape, covered in slick, scaled skin that shimmered wetly in the light. Its glowing eyes burned bright, piercing the darkness like twin fires. Its jaws parted, revealing rows of dagger-like teeth dripping with saliva. The Leviathan. We scrambled through narrow passages, ducking under low rock formations and leaping over fissures. Pain exploded in my leg as I scraped against a jagged edge, but fear numbed the agony. I dared not look back. "Elena, this way!" I yelled, spotting a faint glow from a vertical shaft ahead. She followed, breath ragged and quick. Victor covered our rear, shouting orders and hurling rocks behind us to slow the beast's advance. The creature snapped at Victor, its claws raking the air inches from his shoulder. He dodged with a grunt, adrenaline fueling his movements. We reached the shaft, a narrow tunnel that led upward, the walls slick with moisture. We climbed desperately, fingers clutching cold rock, muscles burning. Behind us, the roar faded, but I knew it was retreating only to hunt again. We emerged into a small chamber, where faint daylight trickled through cracks overhead. The air felt lighter, but still carried a hint of the cave's menace. The walls were smeared with ancient, bloody handprints, desperate warnings left by those who'd faced the Leviathan before us. We caught our breath, faces pale and hearts pounding. Mark was gone, swallowed by the darkness and the beast. And the Leviathan was still out there, waiting.
Emerging into that small chamber felt like stepping out of hell and into a fragile slice of salvation. The faint daylight filtering through narrow cracks in the rocky ceiling was the first real light we'd seen since plunging into the maw. It cast long, trembling shadows on the wet stone walls, which were smeared with ancient handprints, dry blood dark and cracked like the history of countless souls who'd faced the abyss and failed. Those desperate marks screamed a warning, a silent plea etched in pain and fear. Don't follow us. My chest heaved, breaths shallow and ragged. The echoes of the Leviathan's roar still thundered in my mind, like a ghost refusing to be silenced. Mark was gone, swallowed by the dark unknown. That cold fact slammed into me with the weight of a stone, numbing the world around me. He wasn't coming back. Victor, ever the professional soldier and seasoned spelunker, immediately assessed our surroundings. Years of experience taught him to look for the smallest details, cracks in the rock, signs of recent movement, subtle changes in air pressure. The walls were rough and slick, soaked with moisture that ran in thin rivulets to the uneven floor. The air here was biting cold, carrying the faint but unmistakable vibrations beneath our feet, like the slow pulsing heartbeat of the mountain itself. "Elena," Victor called softly, "how stable is this chamber? Can it hold us?" Elena's fingers danced over her handheld scanner, the digital screen flashing intermittently with readings. "Structurally solid for now, no risk of collapse immediately. But those vibrations, they're irregular and rising. Something's moving deeper underground. I'm guessing the Leviathan, or whatever it is on the move." I swallowed hard, the rising fear knotting my stomach. The Leviathan was no mere animal. It was something elemental, part of the earth, part of the darkness itself, something that existed before humans, before time. We needed to move. Staying meant certain death. Victor spread out our battered maps across a flat rock, the thin paper curled at the edges from damp and dirt. We have two paths. One leads to an old miner's tunnel that could reach the surface. The other heads deeper, more dangerous, but maybe our only way out if the miner's route is blocked. I studied the maps, weighing our options. Going deeper was a gamble we couldn't afford, but the miner's tunnel could be unstable, or worse, a dead end. "We try the miner's tunnel," I said, voice steady. Victor nodded. "Good, we leave at first light." Night in the mall was a darkness unlike anything I'd known, not just absence of light, but a suffocating presence that swallowed sound and hope alike. I lay on the cold, damp floor, shivering despite my jacket. The eerie silence was punctuated only by distant drips and faint echoes that seemed almost like whispers, or maybe my mind playing tricks. Around midnight, a new sound stirred the chamber, a faint scratching, scraping on stone. Elena twitched, clutching her jacket tight as if it could shield her from whatever was out there. Mark's hand shot up, signaling silence. Every muscle in me tensed. The scratching grew louder, closer, deliberate, like the slow approach of a predator. I felt the Leviathan's presence inching into our sanctuary, testing us. Suddenly, a small rock dislodged from the ceiling, crashing near my foot. My heart leapt. The silence shattered. "We're not alone," Victor whispered, scanning the shadows. We huddled together, breath shallow, senses stretched thin. Every creak, every drip, every whisper of air felt like a threat. At dawn, the faintest light through the cracks was a relief, but the terror remained. We packed up and prepared to navigate the treacherous path to the miner's tunnel. The route was a brutal gauntlet, narrow ledges slick with moisture, jagged rocks forcing us to crawl, and claustrophobic passages where the walls pressed in like a vice. The cave seemed alive, resisting our escape. Halfway along the path, Elena froze, pointing to fresh, dark handprints smeared on the rock wall, stark and horrifying in the faint light. They trailed off around a corner. My stomach clenched. Whoever made them was close, but no voices or movement greeted us. The air grew thick with decay, the rotten metallic stench of death. My throat burned from the smell. A faint whisper floated to us, broken and unintelligible, but unmistakably human. "Elena," Victor said sharply, "we're not alone." We edged toward the source, the beam of our flashlights flickering across broken rocks and twisted roots. The cave opened into a small chamber, bathed in weak daylight filtering through a narrow crack above. There, slumped against the wall, was a man, gaunt and pale, his clothes tattered, skin scratched raw, his eyes wild with terror, reflecting the same nightmare we'd faced. "Help me," he rasped, his voice hoarse from dehydration or despair. "The beast, it hunts." Before we could react, the cave trembled violently. A roar, deeper and more furious than before, shook the chamber. The man's eyes widened in horror. "Run! Run!" Victor grabbed him, steadying the stranger as we fled into the maze of stone and shadow. The Leviathan's wrath echoed behind us, like a nightmare storm of falling rocks, choking dust, and bone-deep fear. Hours later, we collapsed in a narrow fissure, bruised and gasping. The stranger, Stefan, explained how he'd been trapped after a mining collapse and had evaded the Leviathan by hiding in the tunnels. His stories confirmed what we feared. The Leviathan wasn't just a blind beast. It was an ancient, cunning predator. It hunted with terrifying intelligence, adapting its tactics to trap prey in the labyrinth below. Exhaustion pulled at my eyelids, but terror kept me awake. The tunnels were alive with shadows and death. The Leviathan was still out there, watching, waiting.
The air in the chamber felt thicker now, heavier,
like the cave itself was breathing with us, or maybe against us. My headlamp flickered weakly, casting a trembling halo of light that danced over the jagged walls. The bloody handprints we had found earlier seemed fresher than they should have been, as if whoever left them had only just passed through. Victor stood at the center of the room, his breathing shallow. "We can't stay here," he muttered, though his voice betrayed uncertainty. "It's too open, too exposed." Elena didn't answer. She was staring at something on the far wall, a crude carving etched deep into the rock. I moved closer and saw that it was a series of figures, human shapes being dragged down by something long, serpentine, and crowned with a monstrous head. Beneath it, crude symbols had been scratched in, their meaning lost to time. But I didn't need to be a linguist to understand the message. This is where they are taken. This is where they don't return. A sudden drip, drip, drip echoed through the chamber. The sound was slow, deliberate, almost rhythmic. It wasn't water. The metallic tang in the air told me it was something else. Blood, maybe. Victor swung his flashlight toward the sound. In the far corner of the chamber, half hidden in shadow, something was hanging from the ceiling, something that swayed ever so slightly. My stomach twisted as the beam of light revealed it. A mangled body, its skin pale and shredded in places, suspended by strands of something glistening and fibrous, almost like spider silk, but thicker, more organic. The smell hit us next, a stench so foul it made my vision blur for a second. Rotten flesh mixed with the wet, earthy musk of the cave. Elena gagged and stumbled back, pressing her sleeve over her nose. "That's Mark," Victor said softly, his voice hollow. I didn't want to believe it, but even in the poor light I could recognize his boots, the same ones he had been wearing when we entered. The strands holding him aloft pulsed faintly, like veins carrying some dark fluid. That's when I realized they weren't hanging from the ceiling at all. They were growing from it, something alive, something that could feed. Before we could move, the cave trembled under a deep, rumbling vibration. It wasn't a roar this time. It was slower, heavier, like the sound of something dragging itself across stone. Victor pointed toward one of the tunnels branching off from the chamber. "We go, now!" We hurried, but every step felt like moving deeper into a predator's den. The tunnels here were narrower, their walls slick with moisture that smelled faintly of iron. My boots slipped more than once, and the sound of our hurried footsteps seemed amplified, bouncing around in the dark. Then came the whispering. At first I thought it was Elena, mumbling under her breath, but when I glanced at her, I saw her eyes wide and fearful, scanning the shadows. The whispers weren't words, not in any language I knew, but they carried meaning. They wound through my mind like tendrils, feeding on every fear I had, replaying memories I didn't want to remember. It felt personal. Victor stumbled for a second, gripping his head. "Do you hear that?" he hissed. "It's inside my skull." The sound grew louder, more insistent, as if whatever was whispering was also moving closer. A faint scraping noise echoed behind us, metal on stone. I turned, raising my light, and froze. Something massive was crawling along the wall, moving with a sickening, unnatural grace. Its body was segmented, its skin pale and slick, glistening with slime. Multiple sets of limbs clung to the rock, each ending in claw-like hooks that dug effortlessly into the stone. The Leviathan. Only this time I could see more of it. And it wasn't just a serpent. It was something far worse. Its head was broad and plated with chitinous armor, its mouth opening sideways like a deep-sea predator, revealing concentric rows of teeth. And its eyes, not glowing this time, but black, endless voids that seemed to swallow light. It opened its mouth slightly, and the whispers stopped. In their place came a sound I will never forget, a slow, deliberate inhale, like it was smelling us, tasting us in the air. Victor shoved me forward. "Move!" We ran, our lights bobbing wildly, throwing fractured shadows on the walls. Behind us, the creature moved quickly, but deliberately, never rushing, almost as if it enjoyed the chase. We came to a fork, left or right. Victor chose right without hesitation. The tunnel narrowed so much that we had to turn sideways to fit. Our lights dimmed further, batteries draining fast. Somewhere behind us, I heard the sound of claws dragging again, closer this time. Then, abruptly, silence. We stopped, straining to listen. My ears rang from the stillness. Then, directly ahead, a faint, wet drip. Elena's voice trembled. "It's not behind us anymore." I swung my light upward and froze. The Leviathan was clinging to the ceiling right above us, its body coiled like a spring, its mouth inches from Victor's head.
The first thing that hit me when we stepped into that cavern wasn't the sight, it was the smell. A stench so heavy, so thick, it clung to my tongue and filled my lungs like a living thing. It was a rancid mix of rot, mold, and something metallic. Blood. My headlamp cut through the darkness, but instead of revealing a path forward, it revealed hell itself. Bones, mountains of them, piled against the jagged walls and spilling into the center of the chamber. Human bones, animal bones, some so warped and stretched they didn't seem to belong to any creature that should exist. The walls themselves seemed alive. Thick, slit veins of something black pulsed faintly, snaking through the stone like the cave itself had grown infected. Water dripped from stalactites above, splattering onto the piles below with a hollow, echoing sound that felt almost deliberate. "This?" Elena's voice cracked, her breath shaky. "This is where it feeds." Victor didn't answer right away. He stepped forward, his boots crunching on brittle ribs and skull fragments. "No," he finally said, voice low. "This is where it stores them." I didn't want to think about the implication. We picked our way through the carnage, careful not to make too much noise. Every step felt like an announcement to whatever lurked deeper in this underground nightmare. My eyes darted around, searching for any sign of movement, but the only thing moving was the slow, unsettling pulse in the walls. And then I saw it. Half buried under a heap of bones, a flashlight lay cracked, but still faintly glowing. I knew that flashlight. The red tape wrapped around its handle, the small dent in its side. Marks. I froze. "Victor," I whispered. He turned, saw where I was looking, and his jaw tightened. Elena's eyes followed, and the realization hit her too. Mark had been here, which meant the Leviathan had dragged him here. Victor knelt, brushing the bones aside until the flashlight rolled free. There was no sign of Mark's body, only scraps of torn fabric that might have been his jacket, and a streak of something dark on the stone. It was then that I noticed something else. On the far side of the chamber, partially hidden behind a wall of rib cages stacked like bricks, there was a tunnel, narrow but tall enough for a person to squeeze through. And from deep within that tunnel, I swore I heard breathing. Slow, heavy, deliberate breathing. "Elena," I mouthed silently, pointing. She went pale, shaking her head. Victor's hand went to the knife strapped to his thigh. Not that a knife would mean anything against a creature like the Leviathan. The breathing stopped. The chamber went so silent that the ringing in my ears became deafening.
My instincts screamed at me to back away, to get out now, but before we could move, a shadow shifted in the tunnel. Something massive began to emerge. At first, I thought it was the cave wall moving, the same mottled, rock-like texture, slick with moisture. But then I saw the curve of a jaw, the glisten of teeth in the dim light. The Leviathan crawled out with a terrible, deliberate slowness, its claws dragging deep grooves into the stone. Its body was too large for the tunnel, scraping against it as it moved, shedding flakes of hardened skin that fell to the ground like bits of broken shell. Its head turned toward us not with eyes. The creature had no visible eyes, but with some other sense, as if it could taste the air we disturbed. The sound it made wasn't a roar this time. It was worse, a deep, wet rattling in its chest, like a predator savoring the moment before the kill. Victor hissed, "Move, now!" We tried to retreat quietly, but there was no way to move across that bone-strewn floor without sound. A single femur snapped under my boot, the crack echoing like a gunshot. The Leviathan reacted instantly. It lunged forward, impossibly fast for something so massive, its claws slashing the air where I'd been standing a moment before. I stumbled back, the tip of one claw grazing my shoulder, not cutting, but leaving a burning sensation, like the skin itself recoiled from the touch. Victor shoved me toward the far wall, where another narrow passage branched off. "Go!" he barked. We ran. The tunnel was so tight I could feel the wall scraping my arms, but behind us, the sound of bones shattering and claws raking stone told me the creature was forcing its way after us. The ground sloped sharply downward, and suddenly we were sliding, skidding into another chamber. This one was smaller, but no less horrifying. The walls here were covered in strange markings, carved deep into the rock, some of them smeared with dried blood. "Elena!" I started, but she was already examining them, her hands shaking. These aren't just markings, they're warnings." The Leviathan's roar bellowed through the tunnels, closer now, echoing so violently the dust shook loose from the ceiling. Victor didn't wait for an explanation. He grabbed Elena by the arm and hauled her toward yet another exit. My legs burned as I ran, my chest tight from both fear and the thinning air. Somewhere behind us, I heard the unmistakable sound of something huge forcing its way through rock, the cave groaning in protest as if it too feared the thing inside it. We didn't stop running until the ground leveled out again. And that's when we saw it, a faint shimmer of light ahead, dancing on the walls like water, an underground river. For a moment, hope flared. If we could follow it, maybe it would lead to the surface. But before we could reach the water, the roar came again. This time, from ahead of us. The Leviathan wasn't behind anymore. It was already waiting.
I woke to a distant sound, the slow, rhythmic echo of water dripping somewhere far away. For a split second, I thought I was dreaming. Then the smell hit me. It wasn't just damp earth anymore. It was thicker now, heavier, clinging to the inside of my throat. Metallic, like rusted iron mixed with something rotten, like meat left to die in a sealed box. The stench seemed to crawl into my lungs and stay there, turning each breath into a fight. We had camped in a space that barely deserved the word, a narrow recess in the cave wall, cramped enough that we had to sleep sitting up, knees almost touching. Elena was slumped against the rock, still asleep, the weak beam from her helmet light catching only part of her face. Victor, as always, was already awake, crouched at the opening, staring into the black mouth of the tunnel ahead. "How long have you been up?" I whispered. He didn't turn when he answered. "Long enough to hear it move again." The way he said it, no name, no description, sent a ripple of cold through me. We had all silently agreed not to call it anything. Giving it a name would make it more real, more tangible, more closer, and I preferred to cling to the fragile illusion that maybe, just maybe, we were still chasing shadows and not running from something that wanted to eat us. Victor finally turned his head toward me, his face half lit. "We can't stay here. The air's getting heavier. If it comes, we're boxed in." I glanced at Elena. Her breathing was shallow, her skin pale. Every mile we put between us and the surface seemed to take something from her. But Victor was right. Staying meant accepting death. We packed our gear in silence, each movement deliberate, careful, as if any sound might shatter the thin bubble of safety we'd built overnight. When we stepped back into the main tunnel, the sound of our boots on the wet stone seemed deafening. Every drip of water, every shift of gravel underfoot was amplified in the dark. My eyes kept darting to the walls, noticing strange markings I hadn't before. Long, deep grooves running parallel to the floor, like something massive had been dragging along both sides at once. We walked for what felt like hours without speaking. The air seemed to press against us, colder now, and yet thick with that sickening metallic rot. My mind kept replaying the sound Victor had described, that shifting, sliding movement, and imagining how close it might be. Eventually, the tunnel widened, the ceiling rising into a vast chamber that swallowed the glow of our helmet lights. The rock above curved in impossible arches, like the rib cage of some dead god, and the walls shimmered faintly with veins of something that looked like wet obsidian. Victor stopped dead. "Do you hear that?" I strained my ears, at first catching only the echo of water again. But then, there it was. A low, deep hum. Not mechanical, not natural either. It wasn't in the air. It was in the rock. Elena stirred, her voice weak. "It's breathing." Her words landed heavy in my chest. I wanted to tell her she was imagining things, but the more I listened, the more I felt it. A slow expansion and contraction in the stone beneath our boots, like the chamber itself was inhaling and exhaling. "This isn't a cave," Victor muttered, his voice flat with realization. "It's part of it." And then I understood what he meant. We hadn't just stumbled into the Leviathan's territory. We were inside it.
The hum wasn't just a sound anymore. It was a presence, a deep, vibrating force that pulsed beneath my skin and rattled the blood in my veins. I could feel it in my teeth, in the tightening of my chest, sinking to my own heartbeat until I couldn't tell where I ended and the cave began. Victor's flashlight flickered over the vast chamber like a wary predator, its beam slicing through the suffocating blackness. Yet the light felt weak here, swallowed by the shadows, as if the darkness itself was alive, absorbing and devouring every flicker of hope. Elena pressed her back against the slick stone wall, her hands trembling as she gripped the uneven surface, eyes wide and darting with every twitch of shadow. She barely whispered, "I don't think this place wants us to live." A sudden, low rumble vibrated through the floor. Not the sharp, violent shock of an earthquake. This was slow, deliberate, calculated. It felt like the cavern itself was waking, stretching its ancient limbs deep beneath us. And then the tunnel behind us, the one we just crawled through, started to move. It didn't crumble or cave in. The stone twisted and shifted, folding inward smoothly, like the jaws of some monstrous creature sealing shut. The walls pressed closer, narrowing the passage, cutting off our retreat with terrifying precision. I lunged forward, pressing my palms against the cold, damp rock, desperate to hold the opening.
The stone was slick and strangely warm, pulsating beneath my skin in perfect rhythm with the deep hum. I tried to pull the walls back apart, but it was useless. The cave wasn't just a place anymore. It was a living thing responding to us. Victor grabbed my arm, yanking me back. "Don't touch it," he hissed. "Why?" I gasped, struggling against his grip. He shook his head, eyes dark and unreadable. "Because it's touching back." Elena's helmet light swept the far side of the chamber, revealing something I hadn't noticed before. The walls were lined with dozens of narrow vertical slits, not cracks, not veins, but living eyes, thin, unblinking, lidless orbs glimmering with a wet sheen that reflected our pale lights like malevolent mirrors. The cave was watching us. A thick, warm drop splattered onto my jacket. Not water, but something viscous and coppery, smelling sharply of fresh blood. My skin crawled as more drops fell, pooling silently on the stone floor beneath us. The chamber shuddered violently, and the floor beneath me rippled like water. I staggered, barely catching my balance as the stone surged in slow waves beneath my feet. The sensation was terrifying, a solid cave acting like a living ocean. Victor cursed low under his breath, his voice sharp. "We have to move, now!" But escape was no longer an option. Other passages, the few exits we'd seen, were closing in. Stone plates slid together with sickening, grinding sounds, like teeth crunching into flesh, sealing off every way out. It became horrifyingly clear this wasn't a trap to keep us from leaving. It was a pen, a shepherd's crook guiding us deeper into the belly of the beast. The Leviathan wasn't just hunting us, it was herding us into the darkest part of its living maze, to a place where no light reached, where hope came to die. And I realized then, with a terror that rooted me to the spot, this was far bigger, older, and more alive than any creature I'd ever imagined.
The tunnel's pulse quickened with every step we took. The air grew thicker, heavy with moisture and the unmistakable tang of blood and salt. Each breath was a battle. The thick air clawed at my throat, filling my lungs with a choking mist that tasted like iron and decay. Victor's flashlight flickered weakly as he led the way through the twisting passageways, his face drawn tight with exhaustion and fear. Elena clung to my jacket, her eyes wide and glassy, as if staring too long into the darkness might swallow her whole. We emerged into a chamber so vast it seemed to swallow the light entirely. Above us, the ceiling vanished into shadows deeper than any night I had ever known. The walls were not rock as I had understood it, but a sick, pulsating mixture of flesh and stone. Veins as thick as my arm throbbed beneath a thin, translucent membrane, shifting in slow, rhythmic waves. Thick tendrils, slick with a viscous film, extended like ancient roots from every surface, curling and coiling into the inky black pool at the chamber's center. The water was thick and oily, reflecting distorted images of the cavern's monstrous interior. And there, at the very core of the chamber, was the Leviathan's heart. It was a grotesque mountain of living flesh and muscle, mottled with patches of glistening skin and covered in hundreds of tiny, writhing eyes that blinked and darted in unison. The whole mass pulsed with an unholy life, expanding and contracting as if breathing in the stale cave air, an impossible organism that had existed beyond the boundaries of nature. The overpowering stench of decay and salt water filled my nostrils, sending a wave of nausea crashing through my stomach. I forced myself to swallow the bile rising in my throat, my hands trembling. Victor's voice was barely a whisper, but it carried the weight of revelation. This is what the tunnels are," he said, gesturing with a shaky hand. "They're part of the Leviathan's body, its shell, its home, and its weapon." Suddenly, I understood with bone-deep clarity. We weren't just trespassing in its lair, we were inside it, trapped within the living, breathing flesh of a creature so vast and ancient it blurred the lines between beast and landscape. The pulse beneath us intensified, sending waves of raw, physical dread crashing over me. The chamber seemed to contract, the tendrils recoiling and curling tighter, as if sensing our presence, our intrusion, threatening to crush us in their grasp. Elena gasped and stumbled backward, nearly falling into the dark pool. "We have to get out," she pleaded, voice shaking. Victor shook his head, his gaze fixed on the enormous, writhing mass. "There is no out anymore. Not now. We have awakened the heart." The surface of the black water rippled violently, and suddenly a monstrous shape surged upward, a massive head crowned with rows of jagged teeth that gleamed like knives under the flickering light. Its eyes, glowing faintly like embers, locked on us with cold, merciless intelligence. The Leviathan was awake, but it wasn't just hungry. It was furious. The ground beneath us shuddered violently as the creature let loose a terrifying roar that echoed through the tunnels like the sound of 1,000 bones breaking all at once. I barely had time to react before the tendrils whipped toward us, twisting and coiling with unnatural speed and strength, their slimy surfaces slick with some corrosive slime that hissed as it touched my skin. Pain exploded along my arm where a tendril scraped me, burning like acid, and I stumbled back, dragging Elena with me. Victor fired his pistol blindly, the flashes of the muzzle lighting the chamber in chaotic bursts. The Leviathan recoiled momentarily, but its fury only grew. It was as if every strike we landed only fueled its rage, making it stronger, faster, more deadly. I could feel the very walls pressing in, the pulse speeding up, and a dreadful certainty settled in my bones. This was not just a battle for survival. This was a war against a primordial force that saw us no more than insects, irritants to be crushed and consumed.
The air was thick with dust, blood, and a stench so vile it clawed at my throat with every breath. The cavern itself seemed to shudder under the weight of the Leviathan's roar, a guttural sound that shook the very bones beneath my feet and echoed through the endless tunnels like a death knell. I was drenched in sweat, muscles trembling from exhaustion, but there was no room for hesitation. Elena was barely conscious, slumped against the cold, damp stone. Victor was already dragging her away from the monstrous mass, his face a mask of grim determination. Every step they took seemed to sink deeper into the living flesh of this ancient nightmare. The pistol in Victor's hand was nearly empty, the final round spent firing wildly into the thrashing mass of pulsing tendrils and jagged teeth. The flashes of light illuminated the grotesque scene in brief, terrifying bursts, casting long shadows that danced like specters on the cave walls. But it was enough, a fragile moment, a heartbeat stolen from the jaws of death. "We have to move, now," Victor hissed, his voice raw but sharp with urgency. Swallowing the lump of fear lodged in my throat, I forced my legs to obey, stumbling through the shifting shadows of the cavern. The walls felt alive, breathing, contracting, pushing in, as if the Leviathan's pulse was synchronizing with my own racing heartbeat. The floor beneath us thrummed like a drumbeat of doom, drowning out all other sounds. Suddenly, the ground cracked wide open beneath us, a fissure splitting the floor like the maw of some enormous beast. From its depths, an icy wind shot upward, chilling me to the bone and stealing the warmth from my skin. The Leviathan's roar turned into a primal scream, anguished, furious, and terrifying beyond words as it recoiled into the shadow depths. There was no time to hesitate. We ran, desperate, raw, and ragged, into the narrowing tunnels that seemed to swallow us whole. Each breath burned my lungs. Each step felt like dragging my body through fire. The cavern's pulse thundered louder, like the beating heart of a colossal creature hunting us relentlessly. Behind us, the sound of collapsing stone echoed like a death toll. The tunnels were sealing, one by one, cutting off every route we'd followed deeper underground. The Leviathan wasn't just a predator, it was the cave itself, and it was closing its grip. Victor reached a narrow crevice barely wide enough for one person and pulled Elena through first, gently but urgently. He turned to help me, his eyes wild with exhaustion and desperation. As I scrambled through, the cavern shook violently, dust and small stones raining down from above. The last thing I saw before the darkness swallowed me was the Leviathan's glowing eyes, watching, endless, patient, eternal. I woke gasping under a sky smeared with stars, the cold night air filling my lungs like a blessing. The nightmare was over, or at least I hoped it was. But the scars ran deeper than flesh and bone. The Leviathan wasn't just some subterranean monster. It was an ancient force of nature, a dark pulse beneath the earth's skin, a living shadow that stretches beyond time and space. And sometimes it reaches out.